Hello everybody. This is our course of Western Intellectual History, and today's talk will be the first part of our lecture on Karl Marx. As you see from the dates, Karl Marx lived throughout the 19th century. He was born in 1818 and died in 1883. His place of birth was Germany, where he studied and graduated from the University of Berlin. Then he worked as a journalist for a while, then moved with his family to Paris for a short time before finally moving to London, where he lived for the rest of his life. The philosophy of Karl Marx is known as Marxism, and it is a philosophy that has exerted a major influence all over the world in the 20th century. Marxism, similar to other philosophies or systems of thought, offers a specific worldview, and this specific worldview is enclosed in a number of concepts and ideas. There are a number of ideas related to Marxism and helping to give us the worldview offered by the theory. However, due to the focus of Marxism on economics and politics in particular, and due to its adoption of a deterministic, materialistic view of human history that claims to offer a scientific theory of the direction or the trajectory of the development of human societies in time, Marxism, because of all these features, has had a concrete and practical impact on the world, not just a merely theoretical impact. For example, in 1917, a major revolution, the Russian Revolution, happened, and this major revolution was mainly led by intellectuals who believed in Marxism. People who used the ideas of Karl Marx to incite a major revolution that toppled the centuries-old ruling regime of Russian Tsars. And this revolution of 1917 launched a new system of government in what came to be known as the Soviet Union. We no longer had just Russia. There was this big entity conglomeration of states known as the Soviet Union, and it became one of the two major world powers, especially after the Second World War. Now, the government of the Soviet Union implemented Marxist ideas such as socialism and communism. These ideas, they were implemented in the economy of the Soviet Union and the politics of the Soviet Union. Thus, they caused great changes in the societal makeup of the Russian population. This has remained the case throughout the 20th century, but towards the end of the 20th century, in 1989 to be exact, the fall of the Soviet Union occurred, a major historical event. And this fall of the Soviet Union led some political and economic analysts to talk about the fall of Marxist ideology itself. They said, okay, if the Soviet Union was following Marxist ideas and the Soviet Union now has fell apart and we don't have any longer this entity known as the Soviet Union, it means that there is a failure of Marxism. However, these analyses that happened in the immediate aftermath of the fall of the Soviet Union, they later changed because extensive and ongoing research is still happening now and pointing out that the failure of some socialist or some communist regimes in several countries all over the world is actually not due to the failure of the theory of Marxism itself. It is not because Marxism has inherent faults as a theory, but it is rather due to the faulty and corrupt application of this theory. Of course, this does not signify that Marxism has no weak points. As a matter of fact, no philosophical system is perfect, and Marxism, like other philosophies, has strengths and weaknesses, as all theories do. So, this example of the Russian Revolution was used to show us that Marxism is not just a philosophy or a theory that was studied in books of philosophy and in classrooms and exams, but actually it was very practical, and it was put into effect and caused major events related to 20th century world history. Now, let us go back to the writings of Karl Marx. Karl Marx actually has two major works that harbor the basic ideas or the basic concepts of Marxism. These works are the Communist Manifesto, published in 1848, the mid-19th century. This manifesto was published in London, and it is written by Karl Marx in collaboration with Friedrich Engels. The second title is Capital, or Das Kapital in German. It was first published in 1867, and in this book we can know that Marx was influenced by German philosophy, French sociology, as well as British economics. He got his major influences from these three different fields: the field of German philosophy, the field of French sociology, and British economics. Now we will focus on Marxism itself as a theory, and we will discuss parts of Marxism in this lecture to be continued in a coming lecture. Marxism actually can be described as a dialectical, materialistic, determinism theory of human history. So, in order to properly understand Marxism, you will need to know the meaning of each of the three terms. It is a system of philosophy, or it is a theory of the development of human history, and this system or this theory has qualities of materialism, dialecticism, and determinism. Let us see what we mean by each of these three terms. First, determinism. When we say that a certain system of thought or a certain philosophy or theory is deterministic, what is determinism? Determinism is a philosophical doctrine that claims that all human decisions, actions, and historical events, whether we are talking about individual events happening in an individual's life or societal events, everything, whether it is a decision made by people or an action undertaken by people or even an event in history, everything is the inevitable consequence of the past history of the individual or the past history of the society. So actually, it means that our decisions or our actions or the major events that occur in our lives or in our in the historical periods we live in, everything is determined by the past. So, as you see, determinism can be considered as the opposite of free will, because determinism emphasizes that the circumstances are very powerful, whether these circumstances are environmental or physical or psychological. These conditions or these circumstances have a major impact on human life, and they decide the trajectory taken by human life, whether we are talking about individual or collective societal lives. So, this theory of Marxism is a deterministic theory. It does not believe in free will. It believes that the past history, with all the circumstances of this past history, including environmental, physical, psychological, of course, economic and political, everything about the past is going to determine the direction that will be taken by humans as individuals or as societies, and it will determine the decisions or the actions or the events that will occur later in the future. The second term, which is again the second feature of Marxism, is materialism. Materialism is a philosophical doctrine that claims that the physical matter is the only reality. Like there is nothing in the universe we live in except physical matter, and that the laws that govern physics or physical matter can be used to explain everything in the universe. Even when we talk about things that do not seem to be material, even if we talk about our feelings or our thoughts or our minds or the human will, these things are also subjected to the laws of physics. So materialism is closely related to Marxism and is also closely related to another philosophical doctrine, the doctrine known as empiricism, which means that the experience of our senses, what we can see or hear or smell or taste or touch, these experiences are the only sources of knowledge. Our senses are the only sources of knowledge. So the second feature after determinism is materialism. Karl Marx presented a theory which is deterministic, believing that the circumstances of the past decide the future, and a theory which is materialistic, believing that the only reality is material reality, and the laws of physics are the only laws that control everything, even if we talk about feelings or thoughts or human mind or human will, all this is subjected to the laws of physics. And we mentioned that materialism is closely related to empiricism, the philosophical doctrine that focuses on the senses, our five senses, sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch, as the only source of knowledge in our world. The third feature of Marxism is what we call dialecticism. Actually, dialecticism as a philosophical doctrine was applied to the study of history by someone before Marx, by the philosopher and historian Hegel. Hegel wrote a book, a very famous book entitled The Philosophy of History, and in the philosophy of history, Hegel was applying dialecticism as a philosophical doctrine to approach and investigate human history. He used what we call the dialectic method as a logical process, and he wrote an argument in his book, The Philosophy of History, following a certain sequence of 4 steps. Karl Marx was influenced by this dialectic method used by Hegel in the study of history, and Marx himself applied dialecticism in his Marxist philosophy. So let us see the dialectic method that was followed in Hegel's book. Actually, we have a sequence of 4 steps. The argument begins by a thesis statement. You offer or you present a certain idea or a certain argument, and then you go to the next step, which is the antithesis, which is the opposite idea is presented. For example, you present one idea, then you go and present the opposite idea. Of course, The third step will be the conflict that will result inevitably between thesis and antithesis. And the fourth step will be what we call synthesis, which is a resolution of the conflict between the thesis and the antithesis, and a higher order or a higher proposition is offered. So it means like there are four sequence or four steps that occur in any argument: the thesis and the antithesis and the conflict between thesis and antithesis, and the resolution or the synthesis of this conflict, resulting in a new step or a new stage or a new argument or a new proposition. This dialectic method was applied by Hegel in his book The Philosophy of History, while he was trying to investigate and analyze the steps of human history. The last stage of synthesis, it becomes in turn the basis of a new thesis, and the process will start all over again and all the stages will be repeated. So, dialecticism was used by Hegel and used by Marx. Hegel used it first in The Philosophy of History, his major book, and Marx also used it in his theory trying to analyze human history. The two philosophers used dialecticism, and they used this sequence of four steps in order to try to explain the direction taken by human history, the trajectory, the development of human history. They mentioned that human history is like four steps that are always repeated, but they are not repeated exactly as they are, because each time there is a sort of advance. So you have a thesis first, and you have an antithesis, and a conflict between them, and a resolution or a synthesis. This fourth step, the synthesis, becomes the thesis of the next stage of a higher order, and so on. So, does this mean that Hegel and Marx are identical when they use the dialectic method? Actually, they are similar but not identical. There is a major difference between them. Hegel considered that the dialectic process of the four stages that we mentioned are continually repeated, and they involve spirit. They do not just involve matter, but they involve spiritual things. They involve things that are not material, things such as the mind and the feelings and so on. But according to Marx, matter was the only reality. Marx was like 100% materialistic. He would not allow his dialectic method to be applied to anything which is not material, because he did not believe in the reality of anything except matter. That is why Marx's theory is called sometimes the dialectical materialism, the theory of dialectical materialism. It is dialectical, but it is not about anything except material reality. Now we can stop here after discussing this point of dialecticism and the difference between the Hegel's dialectic and the Marxian dialectic, and we will have a second part of this lecture. Thank you for being attentive, and good luck.